Hello and welcome back to Granted Gardens. So if you watched our last video, you saw me mention that we're going to be working on what I initially called a cooking series. I'm thinking about calling it a kitchen series though. We've got some things that we've been experimenting with over the last few weeks if you follow us on any of our other social media outlets, and that is fermentation. So specifically, we've been working on fermenting drinks. Initially, we started off with kombucha, which we are going to do a video on that too. But today, this video is going to be on something similar to kombucha. It's actually called Jun. So Tyler has perfected from first fermentation to second fermentation to bottling. So we're going to go ahead and follow him along on his steps with making Jun. So let's check it out.
Alright, so today we're going to do Jun. You might also hear it pronounced Jun. I say Jun because it just sounds better than Jun. I've got two here that we've already made. It's been 5 days. Generally they say 3 days is as long as it takes to ferment because there's more sugar content in honey, so it actually ferments a lot faster. I like to go for 5 days because I like it a little bit more on the stronger vinegar type side. If you want to keep it more mead-like and sweet like honey, you can actually just do it at 3 days, but it'll just be very sweet compared to what 5 days will produce, which will be more of a kombucha flavor if you like more like that. So if you want to come in, you can see this one is what I'm calling my health brew. It's actually made from Gyokuro green tea and Manuka honey. If you've ever heard of either one of those two things, you know it's like one of the higher tiered versions of the two products that you can get. This one is actually just made from regular organic green tea. It actually has jasmine in it, although by the time that this is done brewing, you can really not taste the jasmine anymore. And it's also made from just a regular raw, unfiltered honey. That's why this one, because it's a more crystallized version of honey, that's why it's more cloudy. This one is more clear because it's been a little more refined but not pasteurized or processed in any way. It's still raw and unfiltered. If you also look, all the fuzzy stuff in there, including the stuff on the bottom, it may look kind of gross. It's not. The stuff on the bottom is mainly yeast, and these things on the top are called scobies, and that's what's doing the majority of the production of the acids in there. Every time you do make Jun or kombucha, you actually end up with 2 scobies, but because this ferments a little faster, when we take the top off here, you'll see that the scoby that it produces is usually paper thin. Kombucha usually by the time that you're done brewing will actually be like a 1/16 of an inch, pretty substantial. These ones will always end up being much smaller. You can actually put them in your scoby hotel, which we'll cover, and that can actually help grow them. If you get a scoby in the mail or you buy your scoby, you'll generally get one that's a good size, like the ones that are floating in here. But we'll go ahead and take the tops off these. We'll go ahead and put these into the bottles. Neither one of these will undergo a second fermentation this time. Maybe I'll do one bottle depending on what I can find, just to show you guys what that entails. But it's not hard start to finish to do the first or the second fermentation. All you really need is a jar, water, honey, your scobies, and then if you do bottle them, you'll want something with a tight lid. I like these flip-top beer bottles. You can usually find them pretty cheaply. You can also just use any kind of glass container with a tight lid. You don't want to use any plastics for storage because the acids can produce a draw out effect of the plastic. You also don't want to use anything metal in the entire process once the fermentation actually starts, because the metal can react to the acids in here and apparently give it a bad flavor. I've never used anything metal. I do use metal in the beginning, just in the brewing process, but once you start the actual tea in here with the starter fluid, you don't want to use metal. So we'll take the tops off of these. I'll show you a look at what the scoby looks like on the top. So this one produced a little bit better of a scoby. This is the new scoby on the top. This is also the new scoby. This little guy down here on the side, that's the old scoby, and if I rotate this around, or try to. He's running away from me. That's the old scoby from the last time. Sometimes they look a little weird. That's okay, as long as you don't see any mold in here. Scobies will usually be smooth looking-ish. Mold will always be fuzzy. So you don't want fuzzy, you want smooth. So the first step in this will be just to remove the scobies themselves. We'll put them into our scoby hotel with some extra liquid in there. And then all you have to do is stir and put in the bottles. So for the second fermentation, all you do, and this is going to take a lot of experimentation on your part, if you know flavors that you like just in general, like the fruit, you could just add the fruit to it. Right now we're going to just add some apples. This is not a lot, a few tablespoons will do. If you actually go online and do a little bit of research when you do this kind of stuff, you'll find out that there's a whole wide range of possibilities that you can do, from using fresh fruit like we're doing here, the solid actual pieces, to using fruit juice. You can use fruit purees. Some people who just want to get the extra fizziness that occurs in the second fermentation, you can see there's a little bit of head that came off of these when we poured them. That's because there is a small amount of carbonation that occurs just in the general process of it creating the kombucha or the Jun flavor. But in the second fermentation, by adding a second round of sugars, that's what really produces the champagne-y kind of fizziness that you get out of kombucha Jun. So you just add the fruit. Not a whole lot. We actually did this once before with the second fermentation and discovered that we did it with plums. We did one with ginger and lime, and we did strawberry, blueberry, and plum. This right here is actually from the last second fermentation. This is plum. You can see the color does change as soon as you add stuff to it. Strawberries will turn a similar color to this. Blueberries will be very dark purplish. But this is what it should look like just from your standard brew. It'll be kind of hazy because we stirred it up. All that stuff in the bottom is mainly yeast, like I said before, and by stirring it, you make sure that all of the good probioticness that's in there stays in there and doesn't get filtered out. Some people will filter that out because they don't like how cloudy it gets and they are put off by drinking that kind of stuff. But the whole point of this is not just for flavor, but there is a lot of probiotic benefits to Jun. Also, by using honey instead of kombucha that has black tea and sugar, this has green tea and honey, and there's a lot of probiotic healthy benefits to raw, unfiltered honey. Enzymes, all kind of stuff. So by doing this, this is more of a healthy option. We'll just say that.
Go.
So just give it a little bit of a swish, and then the only difference between all of these and this one that we're going to go ahead and do a second fermentation on is these will all get put in the refrigerator. This will pretty much immediately stop the fermentation process of these. This one will actually leave out for about 2 to 3 days depending on how strong of a flavor we get out of that. The stronger the flavor that you put in, the less time it'll take to really inherently put that flavor in. You can leave it for a little bit longer than 3 days if you want it extra fizzy, but the sugary the fruit, the faster the second fermentation will go, and that also means the more carbonation that you'll create in there. I've seen people put raisins in here. Generally, I don't do that, but if you want to keep it extra fizzy in the refrigerator, sometimes by adding that raisin in when you bottle it and put it in the refrigerator, you can get a little bit of extra fizz while it's sitting in there. But like I said, the majority of all the fermentation process stops once you put it in the refrigerator. This will generally last about 3 to 4 or 5 months in the refrigerator. In our house, it does not last that long. We just finished the last 2 gallons that we made maybe 2.5 weeks ago, so we consume quite a bit. So just to go into the difference between these two that I made, these ones are the healthier brew that I tried this time, using a Gyokuro Jun green tea. This is actually a green tea that for the last 20 days of its growth cycle before its harvest, they produce shade cloth over the top, and that helps trap a lot of the chlorophyll and other nutrients inside the plants. So with that, if you were to just drink a tea of this, it's going to be very planty and earthy flavored. That's because of all the extra stuff that's caught in there during that process. The other one over here, we just use regular green tea. Very simple. Honey. This had the Manuka honey. I would encourage you to go look at it online because there's a lot of information out there about its inherent health benefits opposite of regular honey. But that's pretty much it for the bottling and the brewing. Next, we'll get into the actual creation of the first fermentation. Okay, so the first step that we're going to do is go ahead and brew the tea that we need for the Jun. So I went ahead, we have 2 French presses. You can do it directly in the jar, you can do it out of the jar. The only reason this time I'm using 2 French presses is because this is loose tea, and loose tea is just easier if you just do it in a concentrated batch such as this, instead of trying to fish all this stuff out or have to empty the whole thing, strain it, and then put it all back in. It's a lot easier just to do it this way. So for this batch, we're going to use the regular tea bags. You don't need the French press for that. You can use a bowl, you can use whatever you want. You need at least 4. I wouldn't go over 6. As you do your research and exploration, just like us, you'll find that different people say different things, and the only reason that is because they do it based off their preference. Really, all you need is honey, green tea, and a scoby, and the starter liquid, and that's it. Generally, when I do this, I always do 4 of the tea bags. That gives you just a nice, well-rounded flavor. If you like the more strong tea flavor, then you can add more. But I actually just had a batch fail this past time that I made it, and that's because I made the tea way too strong, and the scoby ended up kind of deformed. The smell was just not right. So we're just going to do it the way that we know works this time. So that's 5 tea bags in there, and for this we are going to use teaspoons, and we're going to put about 5 to 6 in here. I'm not going to heap them. We're just going to get some nice semi-level scoops. So this, they say, has a lot of health benefits to it in itself. That's why I'm trying to get into the habit of making this more of a healthy type brew. I don't have any more of the Manuka honey because it's not cheap, but this is a good option as your base for the green tea. You can use regular green tea. It's just going to be simple. So we're going to do this. We're going to let them both sit for about 10 minutes. You can do more or less, still dependent on your flavor profile that you're looking for. But if you do take after me and try this specific type of tea, you'll want to make sure that your water is less than 140 degrees. Anywhere between 120 to 140 is good. You just don't want to burn out the good stuff in there. Just like when you add your honey, like you'll see, you don't want to add it to hot water. Yes, hot water will help it dissolve, but it will also pretty much pasteurize your honey, which is what you don't want to do, because you want to pull the health benefits from the organic raw honey. Doesn't have to be organic, it just has to make sure that it says raw on it at least. Raw and unfiltered is better. Raw is good. That's the baseline that you need, is raw. Anything that's not raw will be pasteurized with heat, and that heat, like I said, kills off all the healthy enzymes and stuff that's in here that we're trying to keep for this. Okay, so the next step, while we have our teas brewing, we're going to go ahead and add the honey to some regular, not cold but not really warm either. It's just straight out the tap. If you live inside the city and you're on city water, you will want to use either purified water or take some steps to remove the chlorine from your water. Since we're on a well, we have no chlorine in the water, so we can go ahead and use water straight out of the tap. There is going to be minor impurities in there. I have not made Jun yet with purified water. I can imagine that by using purified water, you could extend the lifespan of your scobies, but I haven't had any problems yet. They're still thriving. Our kombucha scobies are multiplying like it's their job. So feel free to just use regular water if you're on a well. If you're inside a city, maybe use purified water or get one of the pitcher type purifiers, and that might actually work a little better. So I'm going to go ahead and add 1 cup of honey. And this is only for a gallon. So if you do less than a gallon at a time, you will not need this much honey. You'll also see other people might actually use less anyways. You'll see anything out there for a gallon to 2/3 of honey to a whole cup. I use a whole cup because I love honey. I love the taste of it. So 1 cup is more than enough. You just don't want to go over. If you go over, it's going to change the profile of everything, and you don't want to make something that is candy. The point of this isn't for it to be super duper sweet. It's just the honey is a small amount of the flavoring, but predominantly it's the sugar in here that the scoby and all the yeast and bacteria need to create those acids. So we'll add the honey in, we'll just stir it up until it dissolves. Using the cool water, like I said, preserves all the good stuff in the honey, so you don't want to put it in the hot version of this. It might take a while to dissolve the honey, depending on what type of honey you use. Like this came out pretty thin, which means it was probably heated a small amount at one point to help move it through the lines for bottling. If you get a more local raw honey, it may actually be cloudy instead of clear like this. Those types, creamed, or sometimes like the Manuka honey that I used, is very crystallized, and that's normal for its type. But that stuff, because of the way it comes, is very hard to dissolve in the cool water. So it might take some time, but the reward will be well worth the extra effort. As you can see, we're pretty much already done on that one. So we'll go ahead and add our other cup to the next one. Okay, so the next step is to go ahead and add the tea to the jars. We're going to add it a little bit at a time because we, again, don't want to raise this temperature too high too fast. If you do see this start to creep up, I bought these little thermometer strips on here. You don't need those. The safest way to do this would actually be just to let it cool inside the containers until it comes back down to room temperature, and then you would add it to here. But because I've already got so much cool water in here, I can probably add this little by little to get it to the right temperature. This one right here, we'll go ahead and press down, and this one we will put into another container to let this cool off completely. So we went ahead and added our tea to both. As you can see on these, the temperature on this one's a little higher than this one, but that's because we had the cooler temperature water when we added the Gyokuro tea to this one. You can also tell the color difference. This type of green tea will always be a lighter color. The natural brewing process, if you're just going to do 1 cup of this, it's almost white with a tinge of green in it. This one has more of your normal tea color. So we'll go ahead and we'll let the temperatures come down on these. This one says about 78. I could add the scoby to that and it would be fine. This one is up in the mid 80s. Some people will tell you could add it at that stage too. I like letting it come down almost completely to room temperature. Right now it is November, about 40 degrees outside, so our house is generally about at 68. For June, you want to keep the temperature somewhere between 65 and 75. 70 to 65 being the better range to stick to. If you've done kombucha before, or if you're going to try it after some of these videos, you'll notice that they actually like somewhere between 70 and 80 degrees, 75 being the best for kombucha. But for us, we're going to keep it somewhere between 65 and 70 will be good. So we're going to let these cool to temperature, and then the last step will be adding some of the starter liquid from our last batches, and then the scobies themselves. I will also probably shoot another video on what a scoby hotel is, and we may even do another video on how to grow your scobies. You probably saw from the last batch that we took off, those scobies were very small. These will not get much bigger, like I said before, because it brews so fast. But if you were to make a batch of kombucha or Jun like this and leave those thin scobies in a small container like this, if you leave it for up to 2 weeks, you can actually grow a much more thick and healthy scoby. The last thing we'll also do is take a little bit out of here just to feed what's in your scoby hotel if you have one. If you don't have one, or you just bought a scoby, you won't need to scoop any out because you're adding everything in. So our last step is going to be to add the starter, which is basically just whatever tea you had from before. If you ever buy a scoby, if you're doing this for the first time, but the majority of the time you get one, it'll come with enough starter liquid to at least start half a gallon. Because they need to ship it in that same liquid the same way. If, like I said, every time you make a batch, you'll get 2 new scobies. This is more so true for kombucha because you'll get a nice, more healthy one. But with these, they're going to be really thin. So generally, I don't use those for repeat batches. This is just the starter tea, which is basically just another already fermented batch of Jun. So the stuff that you saw us bottle earlier, I'd already took some of that off of the top to put into here. This will not only house the scobies from last batch, but any further batches on down the line. So because I'm making a gallon at a time, I'm going to add 1 cup of the starter fluid of basically Jun, it's Jun, to each one. And this is going to help not only create a more healthy environment for the scoby to start doing its work, but it'll also protect the scoby from going into any form of shock, which can happen if you put the scoby in too early and it's too warm in there for it. That can hurt the scoby. If you have too much tea, sometimes that can also do funny things to the scoby. So really your last step after adding the already brewed Jun to your fresh batches is to go ahead and add your scoby. Scoby number 1. Scoby number 2. Now don't be afraid if they sink straight to the bottom. This is actually one of the first times that I put them in and they have not gone straight to the bottom. Probably just because they're in the fresh liquid so much so that they still have a little bit of carbon dioxide built up in there. That's why they're staying up here. But I know when we showed you earlier before we bottled, they generally will start to go to the bottom and for the most part, in my experience, they'll stay down there. So once you have that done, the last thing that you want to do is, because there is yeast and bacteria in here, you just want to make sure that you cover it. You can use cloth, you can use rubber bands, you can use cheesecloth, a piece of a t-shirt, an old pillowcase, anything like that, as long as the top is covered and it can breathe, and you'll just secure it with a rubber band. Now, like I said, anywhere from 3 to 5 days, you'll let this sit anywhere out of direct sunlight. It doesn't need any sunlight at all. You could put this in a closet if you really wanted to. Just pay attention to the date that you brewed it. I wrote here on the front 11/9. It's November 9th. So in 5 days from now, I'll pull this batch and it'll be ready to go. You can either bottle it or go into the second fermentation. But that's it, and I hope you learned something. I hope you do get to try this, because it is an amazing drink, and it really can replace soda if you drink a lot of soda but you're looking for a healthier option and don't want to cut it out. This might be the option for you. Thanks for sticking with us, and I hope to share more with you soon.